hold yourself on the edge of all that is rational and palpable for the human mind. This is where the cosmos closes the door on the veil of civility you have woven to maintain your sanity. Here there be dragons and more. Here there be the ones waiting for their moment in the stars, when the brutal blasts of supernovas announce their return and the endless darkness of black holes consume the last of your pathetic species. Bow down to the cosmic forces you will never comprehend without the aid of madness. Bow down and respect your elder gods.
The Dunwich Horror, a suspense play produced, edited, and directed by William Spear. Come in, Dunwich, Massachusetts. Come in, Dunwich.
Good evening. This is Henry Armitage. I'm speaking to you for... Dr. Rice, please close the window. I'm speaking to you from my laboratory on the slopes of Sentinel Hill near Dunwich, Massachusetts. Present with me is Dr. Warren Rice, my distinguished colleague from Miskatonic University. We are now about 100 yards from the summit of the hill, which is crowned by a huge table-like stone set in the center of a circle of stone pillars, a place of prehistoric worship. A moment ago, you may have heard the dogs of Dunwich Township barking, as we have heard them for 3 days and 3 nights. Dr. Rice and I know the horror which their barking portends, but the purpose of this broadcast is to make this unbelievable horror believable to you. I hope for your sakes and ours we are successful tonight. It is the eve of All Hallows. Tomorrow will be too late. Our time tonight is very short, so I'll speak only of those more recent events which, believe me, may culminate at any moment in a climax too frightful to wholly contemplate. I will begin with the birth of Wilbur Whately. It was the night of February the 2nd, 1921, Candlemas, toward dawn, when Lavinia Whately, a deformed albino woman about 35 years old, gave birth to her dark, goatish-looking son in the crumbling Whately farmhouse northeast of the village. No one attended her. No doctor or midwife. No one was with her, except her aged, half-insane father, who was known as Wizard Whately. So Wilbur came into this world under heaven knows what incantations, what appeals to what power. A week later, Wizard Whately drove his sleigh into Dunwich Village and reported the event to a group of loungers in Osborne's general store.
Hey, your grandson got yellow hair like Lavinia, Wizard?
No, pigs after his father more. He's dark.
You never spoke of who his father might be now, did you?
Oh, you'll know his father when the time comes. Oh, Lavinia's read and seen some things the most of you only talk about. Calculate her husband's as good as you can find this side of Aylesbury.
Well, we don't be nosy, Wizard.
Maybe it wanted no church that none of you heard of. But you wouldn't ask no better church wedding than Lavinia's.
Well, I didn't hear tell of no wedding, Wizard. When was that?
Oh, not a wedding you'd hear of, Corey. Not a husband you'd hear of, neither. But let me tell you something. Someday you folks will hear a child of Lavinia's calling its father's name on top of Sentinel Hill.
Prophecy? Or idle boasting by an insane old man? Oh, I know I ask a great deal when I ask you to believe that the arrival of an infant into that house of dire poverty and squalor could possibly constitute a horror and a threat to all our known world. Yet it has an earthly history. Perhaps through this history, you will be able to give it credence. Wilbur Whately's growth was uncanny. But even if he had been an average child, he would have become, in time, an unnatural being, for he was surrounded from the first by the most malign influences. There was his grandfather, old Whately, Wizard Whately, who each Halloween climbed Sentinel Hill to the great circle of stone, and while the hills shook, stood holding a great book open on his arms and shrieked into the wind. Shrieked. Yog-Sothoth, that dreadful name, first mentioned in the hideous forbidden book, the Necronomicon. And this wizard Whately was Wilbur's teacher. The villagers began to notice curious things that were going on at the Whately farmhouse. Soon after Wilbur was born, old Whately began to remodel the house. The abandoned upper story was restored, and all the windows were tightly boarded up. And then, Wizard began to buy cattle in large numbers, both horses and cows. Yet the livestock on the farm didn't seem to increase. Young Lem Brown was one day curious enough to creep close to the house to count the Whately herd.
Dr. Armitage, there warn't more'n 12 cows, and them thick. Looked like they had the blight and funny wounds on 'em, like cuts. I heard something, too, in the top part of Wizard's house. Something like water slapping inside, only big like a sea.
One other person went to the Whately farm in the years before I met Wilbur, Dr. Ken Houghton of Aylesbury, who was called by Wilbur himself, who said that his grandfather was dying. Dr. Houghton found the old man in a bedroom on the ground floor, and Wilbur with him. While outside the window, a legion of whippoorwills cried loudly and rhythmically, endlessly. Wilbur spoke about the sound.
Listen, they're whistling time with his breathing now. They're ready. Listen, Doctor. They know his soul's going out. They're waiting.
Yes, Wilbur, that's an interesting superstition. Late in the year for them, too.
And when he goes, if they catch him, they'll keep laughing till break of day. If they don't catch him, they'll quiet down.
You mean you believe that... just a minute. I think he's conscious.
Yes, the birds changed when his breathing changed. Like
Willie,
I say.
Willie.
I'm here.
More space, Willie. Remember, more space soon.
Yes, I'll build it.
You grows, but that grows faster. It'll be ready to serve you soon, Willie.
I know.
But remember, when it's time, you open up the gates to Yog Sothoth with a long chant, the one on page 751 of the book. But mind you, feed it enough, because if it gets out before you opens to Yog Sothoth, it's all over. It's no use.
He's going now. He's dead, Wilbur.
Listen. The birds, they didn't get him. Yes, he's free. He's gone.
It was the winter following Wizard Whately's death that I first met Wilbur. He came in person to the library at Miskatonic University to consult a copy of the hideous Necronomicon, which was kept there in its Latin version, as printed in Spain in the 17th century. I tell you, when he came into my office, I was appalled at his appearance. 8 feet tall, shabby, dirty, bearded. But I was even more appalled by his voice when he spoke to me.
I wrote you a letter a month past, Doctor. I wanted a loan of the book.
Well, that's a book that's never loaned from this library. I doubt if it is from any library.
Well, I have to see it then.
Oh, very well. It's kept right here. As you know, there are only 3 copies of this book in existence. That's why we're careful. Here, you can look at it on this table.
Wizard said it would be on page 751.
What? What is it you're looking for?
The formula, the long chant. The one that opens the gate to Yog-Sothoth.
I felt a wave of fright as tangible as a draught from the tomb. He seemed somehow like the spawn of another dimension, like something only partly of mankind, linked to black gulfs beyond all spheres of force and matter, space and time. And presently he raised his head and spoke again.
It's here, all right, but I'll have to have a copy.
Oh, that paragraph there? Oh, I don't know.
Do you know Latin, Doctor?
Yes, certainly.
Then read it, Doctor. Let's hear how you make it out.
All right, that shouldn't be difficult. Let's see. Nor is it to be thought that man is the oldest or the last of Earth's masters. The old ones were, and the old ones shall be. Not in the spaces that we know, but between them. But only Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate to where the old ones broke through of old. Their hands are at your throats, yet ye see them not.
Dr. Armitage, you see, I reckon I've got to take that book home. There's things in it I've got to try, and you can't hold me up.
No, I'm sorry.
I tell you, Doctor, I'll have the book sooner or later, no matter what. You see, that's waiting for me at home won't wait much longer.
It was a week later that I was awakened suddenly by the fierce yelping of the great watchdog on the campus, followed by a sound from a wholly different throat, a scream. And I knew instantly that Wilbur had come back for the Necronomicon. I hastened into my clothes and rushed across to the library where a crowd had gathered before the smashed window of my office. Inside, there was a fearful groaning and growling, and some instinct warned me that what was taking place there was not for unfortified eyes to see. I brushed back the crowd, motioning only to Professor Rice to come in with me. When we opened the study door, Professor Rice screamed.
No, Dr. Armitage, no, I can't.
Come, close the door. We can't let them see. He's alive, but Lord, what a job that dog's done. Torn him to bits. Oh, it's a horrible sound, that moaning. You suppose we ought to call a doctor?
A doctor? A doctor for that? No doctor in the world would know what to do for that. Look, Armitage, it's not human, nor animal. Where did it come from? Can you tell me? Can you tell me what it is?
No, I couldn't tell what Wilbur Whately was. The thing that lay half bent on its side in a pool of greenish-yellow stickiness was 9 feet tall. And the dog had torn off all the clothing and some of the skin. It was partly human, beyond a doubt, with very man-like hands and head, but the torso and lower parts of the body were fabulous. Its chest had the leathery hide of a crocodile or alligator. But below the waistline, the skin was covered with coarse black fur. And from the abdomen, long greenish-gray tentacles. The limbs terminated in ridgy-veined pads that were neither hooves nor claws. And as Dr. Rice and I stood staring at this presence, the whippoorwills began to cry in unison outside the study window. And then the thing on the floor roused and mumbled.
Yog Sothoth. Yog Sothoth.
Armitage, in heaven's name.
Listen. The Whitmore will. Listen. Yes, he's dead now. Look, Rice. Look what's happening.
He's disintegrating. Of course.
Fast, too. Fading away. Because he isn't made of matter as we know it on Earth. I guess he took after his father. So there'll be nothing left.
His father? What was his father?
I daren't think. I thought then that what came into our world with Wilbur Whately left with him. I forgot what he himself had told me of it, which was waiting in the sealed house Wizard Whately had built, where the cattle were driven to disappear. But Wilbur Whately left a diary, written in a strange alphabet resembling Sanskrit. And I worked off and on for weeks to decipher it. And finally, I read the following passage written by Wilbur when he was no more than 8 years old.
That upstairs is more ahead of me than I had thought it would be, and is not like to have much earth brain. I can see it a little when I make the sign or blow the powder of Ivangatse at it, and it is like them I see Halloween on the hill. I wonder how I shall look when the earth is cleared and there are no earth beings. Maybe like that upstairs looks, which has no body, even fed with all the blood.
Toward morning, in a cold sweat of terror, I called Dr. Rice to my house and told him we had to destroy what's in that farmhouse.
Why can't we just leave the thing locked up there? The house is boarded tight.
Yes, but you think boards will hold it? Don't you realize, man, it hasn't been fed? It hasn't had blood since the 18th of September, when Wilbur Whately came here to die. We left for Dunwich that night, and we've been here on Sentinel Hill ever since, working desperately to discover the formula in time. But a week ago tonight, shortly after dawn... Yeah, hello?
Dr. Armitage, this is Lem Brown. I was just up beyond the glen, Doctor, looking for cows I lost last night.
Yes, Lem?
Well, Doctor, something's been there. Smells like thunder, and there's prints in the road. Great round prints, big as barrel heads, like a elephant has been along.
Anything else, Lem?
That's all I see. Except bushes and trees pushed back from the road, like a house was drug along.
Did you hear anything?
Yes, long toward morning, I heard a sound over toward Whately's place, a kind of ripping or tearing of wood, like a big box was being opened up. Chancey, you heard it too.
Lem, who lives nearest the Whately farm?
Why, that'd be Elmer Fry's place.
Oh, he's on this line too, isn't he? Hang on and I'll ring him.
Yes, Dr. Armitage, this is Central.
I'm trying to get Elmer Fry, Central.
Doctor, he must be out somewheres, and his whole family. I was ringing there an hour ago. Earl Sawyer saw Elmer's cows stampeding in Cold Spring Glen.
Oh, you didn't get him, All right. But if you hear or see anything more, let me know. I'll be here working all day. Rice! Oh, wake up. It's loose. It's out of the house. One family gone already. We have to work. Pray God we find that formula in time. A week since it broke loose. A week of terror and panic here in Dunwich Township. Each night it moves about the countryside, leaving the trees crushed in a 30-foot swathe. as though by a moving mountain, leaving its monstrous tracks on a trail of tarry stickiness, leaving crushed and gutted farmhouses and whole herds of cattle drained of blood. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the story to this moment. And tonight is Halloween. Tonight we are here to... Oh, just one moment, please. Dr. Rice, did you hear something?
With the window closed, no.
Well, we'll throw it open. I thought so. Listen. The sound from 1,000 bending trees. A sound like the sea moving across a forest. Yes. Yes, it's coming here, of course. All Hallows, it comes to Sentinel Hill. Dr. Rice, I'll try the formula and the powder from the altar stone. I want you to stay here at the microphone and report what you see.
Very well, Dr. Armitage.
Oh, wait a minute before I go. To any scientists who may be listening to me, if I fail, there is a possible alternative formula in Falconer's mystical formulae of the Middle Ages on page 24. Listen. Well, there are the whippoorwills. I better get out there. Take over, Dr. Rice.
Yes. I'll do as well as I can, Armitage. Good luck. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Armitage is climbing to the top of the hill, to the altar stone. I can see him plainly, for the moon is high and the night clear. Down the hill toward the dark village, I can see the grasses and shrubbery bending down, marking the monster's ascent. It moves quite fast, and I feel a proximity to phases of being utterly forbidden. Now, Dr. Armitage stands now on the altar stone and is holding the powder which, if the books are correct, will make this thing for an instant visible. It is quite close to him now, perhaps 20 yards or less. He lifts his hands. He flings the powder in a wide arc. I can see... Oh, no! No!
Dr. Rice. Come in, Dunnage. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your suspense announcer. Due to conditions... Oh, just a moment, please. One moment, please. Dr. Rice, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, for a moment I was overcome when I saw... Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you can hear now the incantation of Dr. Armitage. Listen. The whippoorwills mean death. And Dr. Armitage is walking back here now. So we know that whatever it was, it is gone. It is dead. We can be thankful indeed. You see, I saw Dr. Armitage.
Yes. Did you see it, Dr. Rice?
I saw it, Lord, yes.
What did it look like to you?
It looked
here.
Like something made of squirming ropes, but bigger than a barn and shaped, well, like an egg, and dozens of legs, like barrels that half closed when it stepped, and nothing solid about it, and at least 15 or 20 mouths or trunks opening and closing, but what was it?
Oh, a kind of force. A kind of force that doesn't belong in our part of space. Did you notice the half face on top?
Half face. Like a human face.
Yes, very large, but yes, quite human. And quite like Wilbur's, like all the Waitlys.
Then it was...
That's right. It was Wilbur's twin brother. And you saw what 3 weeks' growth had done. And it was the child of Lavinia's who called its father's name on Sentinel Hill, as Wizard Waitley prophesied. You heard it calling, Yog Sotho. Ladies and gentlemen, this night is over. It is All Saints' Day. May heaven bless us all.
You are listening to truly independent radio, KBGA Missoula.
The olden wizards knew him, and named him Quachil Utas. Seldom is he revealed, for he dwelleth beyond the outermost circle, in the dark limbo of unsphered time and space. Dreadful is the word that calleth him, though the word be unspoken save in thought. For Quachil Utas is the ultimate corruption, and the instant of his coming is like the passage of many ages, and neither flesh nor stone may abide his treading, but all things crumble beneath it, atom from atom. And for this, some have called him the treader of the dust. The Testaments of Carnamagus. It was after interminable debate and argument with himself, after many attempts to exorcise the dim, bodiless legion of his fears, that John Sebastian returned to the house he had left so hurriedly. He had been absent only for 3 days, but even this was an interruption without precedent in the life of reclusion and study to which he had given himself completely, following his inheritance of the old mansion, together with a generous income. At no time would he have defined fully the reason of his flight. Nevertheless, flight had seemed imperative. There was some horrible urgency that had driven him forth, but now, since he had determined to go back, the urgency was resolved into a matter of nerves overwrought by too close and prolonged application to his books. He had fancied certain things, but the fancies were patently absurd and baseless. Even if the phenomena that had perturbed him were not all imaginary, there must be some natural solution that had not occurred to his overheated mind at the time. The sudden yellowing of a newly purchased notebook, the crumbling of the sheets at their edges, were no doubt due to a latent imperfection of the paper, and the queer fading of his entries, which almost overnight had become faint as age-old writing, was clearly the result of cheap, faulty chemicals in the ink. The aspect of sheer, brittle, worm-hollowed antiquity, which had manifested itself in certain articles of furniture, certain portions of the mansion, was no more than the sudden revealing of a covert disintegration that had gone on unnoticed by him in his sedulous application to dark but absorbing researches. And it was this same application, with its unbroken years of toil and confinement, which had brought about his premature aging, so that, looking into the mirror on the morn of his flight, he had been startled and shocked as if by the apparition of a withered mummy. As to the manservant, Timmers, well, Timmers had been old ever since he could remember. It was only the exaggeration of sick nerves that had lately found in Timmers a decrepitude so extreme that it might fall, without the intermediacy of death at any moment, into the corruption of the grave. Indeed, he could explain all that had troubled him without reference to the wild, remote lore, the forgotten demonologies and systems of magic into which he had delved. Those pages in the Testaments of Carnamagus, over which he had pondered with weird dismay, were relevant only to the horrors evoked by mad sorcerers in bygone eons. Sebastian, firm in such convictions, came back at sunset to his house. He did not tremble or falter as he crossed the pine-darkened grounds and ran quickly up the front steps. He fancied, but could not be sure, that there were fresh signs of dilapidation in the steps, and the house itself, as he approached it, had seemed to lean a little aslant, as if from some ruinous settling of the foundations. But this, he told himself, was an illusion wrought by the gathering twilight. No lamps had been lit, but Sebastian was not unduly surprised by this, for he knew that Timmers, left to his own devices, was prone to dodder about in the gloom like a senescent owl, long after the proper time of lamp-lighting. Sebastian, on the other hand, had always been averse to darkness or even deep shadow, and of late the aversion had increased upon him. Invariably, he turned on all the bulbs in the house as soon as the daylight began to fail. Now, muttering his irritation at Timmers's remissness, he pushed open the door and reached hurriedly for the hall switch. Because, perhaps, of a nervous agitation which he would not own to himself, he fumbled for several moments without finding the knob. The hall was strangely dark, and a glimmering from the ashen sunset, sifted between tall pines into the doorway behind him, was seemingly powerless to penetrate beyond its threshold. He could see nothing. It was as if the night of dead ages had laired in that hallway, and his nostrils, while he stood groping, were assailed by a dry pungency as of ancient dust, an odor as of corpses and coffins long indistinguishable in powdery decay. At last he found the switch, but the illumination that responded was somehow dim and insufficient, and he seemed to detect a shadowy flickering, as if the circuit were at fault. However, it reassured him to see that the house, to all appearance, was very much as he had left it. Perhaps unconsciously, he had feared to find the oaken panels crumbling away in riddled rottenness, the carpet falling into moth-eaten tatters, had apprehended the breaking through of rotted boards beneath his tread. Where, he wondered now, was Timmers? The aged factotum, in spite of his growing senility, had always been quick to appear, and even if he had not heard his master enter, the switching on of the lights would have signalized Sebastian's return to him. But though Sebastian listened with painful intentness, there was no creaking of the familiar tottery footsteps. Silence hung everywhere like a funereal, unstirred arras. No doubt, Sebastian thought, there was some commonplace explanation. Timmers had gone to the nearby village, perhaps to restock the larder, or in hope of receiving a letter from his master, and Sebastian had missed him on the way home from the station. Or perhaps the old man had fallen ill, and was now lying helpless in his room. Filled with this latter thought, he went straight to Timmers's bedchamber, which was on the ground floor at the back of the mansion. It was empty, and the bed was neatly made, and had obviously not been occupied since the night before. With a suspiration of relief that seemed to lift a horrid incubus from his bosom, he decided that his first conjecture had been correct. Now, pending the return of Timmers, he nerved himself to another act of inspection, and went forthwith into his study. He would not admit to himself precisely what it was that he had feared to see, but at first glance the room was unchanged, and all things were as they had been at the time of his flurried departure. The confused and high-piled litter of manuscripts, volumes, notebooks on his writing table had seemingly lain untouched by anything but his own hand, and his bookshelves, with their bizarre and terrifical array of authorities on diabolism, necromancy, goety, on all the ridiculed or outlawed sciences, were undisturbed and intact. On the old lectern or reading stand which he used for his heavier tomes, the Testaments of Carnamagus, in its covers of shagreen with hasps of human bone, lay open at the very page which had frightened him so unreasonably with its eldritch intimations. Then, as he stepped forward between the reading stand and the table, he perceived for the first time the inexplicable dustiness of everything. Dust lay everywhere, a fine grey dust like a powder of dead atoms. It had covered his manuscripts with a deep film. It had settled thickly upon the chairs, the lampshades, the volumes, and the rich poppy-like reds and yellows of the oriental rugs were bedimmed by its accumulation. It was as if many desolate years had passed through the chamber since his own departure, and had shaken from their shroud-like garments the dust of all ruined things. The mystery of it chilled Sebastian, for he knew that the room had been clean swept only 3 days previous, and Timmers would have dusted the place each morning with meticulous care during his absence. Now the dust rose up in a light, swirling cloud about him. It filled his nostrils with the same dry odor as of fantastically ancient dissolution that had met him in the hall. At the same moment, he grew aware of a cold, gusty draught that had somehow entered the room. He thought that one of the windows must have been left open, but a glance assured him that they were shut, with tightly drawn blinds, and the door was closed behind him. The draught was light as the sighing of a phantom, but wherever it passed, the fine, weightless powder soared aloft, filling the air and settling again with utmost slowness. Sebastian felt a weird alarm, as if a wind had blown him from chartless dimensions or through some hidden rift of ruin, and simultaneously he was seized by a paroxysm of prolonged and violent coughing. He could not locate the source of the draught, but as he moved restlessly about, his eye was caught by a low, long mound of the grey dust, which had heretofore been hidden from view by the table. It lay beside the chair in which he usually sat while writing. Near the heap was the feather duster used by Timmers in his daily round of house-cleaning. It seemed to Sebastian that the rigor of a great, lethal coldness had invaded all his being. He could not stir for several minutes, but stood peering down at the inexplicable mound. In the center of that mound he saw a vague depression, which might have been the mark of a very small footprint, half erased by the gusts of air that had evidently taken much of the dust and scattered it about the chamber. At last, the power of motion returned to Sebastian. Without conscious recognition of the impulse that prompted him, he bent forward to pick up the feather duster. But even as his fingers touched it, the handle and the feathers crumbled into fine powder, which, settling in a low pile, preserved vaguely the outlines of the original object. A weakness came upon Sebastian, as if the burden of utter age and mortality had gathered crushingly on his shoulders between one instant and the next. There was a whirling of vertiginous shadows before his eyes in the lamplight, and he felt that he should swoon unless he sat down immediately. He put out his hand to reach the chair beside him, and the chair, at his touch, fell instantly into light, downward sifting clouds of dust. Afterward, how long afterward he could not tell, he found himself sitting in the high chair before the lectern on which the Testaments of Carnamagus lay open. Dimly he was surprised that the seat had not crumbled beneath him. Upon him, as once before, there was the urgency of swift, sudden flight from that accursed house, but it seemed that he had grown too old, too weary and feeble, and that nothing mattered greatly, not even the grisly doom which he apprehended. Now, as he sat there in a state half terror, half stupor, his eyes were drawn to the wizard volume before him, the writings of that evil sage and seer, Carnamagus, which had been recovered 1,000 years agone from some Greco-Bactrian tomb, and transcribed by an apostate monk in the original Greek, in the blood of an incubus-begotten monster. In that volume were the chronicles of great sorcerers of old, and the histories of demons earthly and ultra-cosmic, and the veritable spells by which the demons could be called up and controlled and dismissed. Sebastian, a profound student of such lore, had long believed that the book was a mere medieval legend, and he had been startled as well as gratified when he found this copy on the shelves of a dealer in old manuscripts and incunabula. It was said that only 2 copies had ever existed, and that the other had been destroyed by the Spanish Inquisition early in the 13th century. The light flickered as if ominous wings had flown across it, and Sebastian's eyes blurred with a gathering rheum as he read again that sinister, fatal passage which had served to provoke shadowy fears. Though Quachel Utas cometh but rarely, it hath been well attested that his advent is not always in response to the spoken rune and the drawn pentacle. Few wizards, indeed, would call upon a spirit so baleful, but let it be understood that he who readeth to himself in the silence of his chamber the formula given hereunder must incur a grave risk if in his heart there abide openly or hidden the least desire of death and annihilation. For it may be that Quachel Utas will come to him, bringing that doom which toucheth the body to eternal dust, and maketh the soul as a vapour, forevermore dissolved. And the advent of Quachel Utas is foreknowable by certain tokens, for in the person of the evocator, and even perchance in those about him, will appear the signs of sudden age, and his house, and those belongings which he hath touched, will assume the marks of untimely decay and antiquity. Sebastian did not know that he was mumbling the sentences half aloud as he read them, that he was also mumbling the terrible incantation that followed. His thoughts crawled as if through a chill and freezing medium. With a dull, ghastly certainty, he knew that Timmers had not gone to the village. He should have warned Timmers before leaving. He should have closed and locked the testaments of Carnamagus, for Timmers, in his way, was something of a scholar, and was not without curiosity concerning the occult studies of his master. Timmers was well able to read the Greek of Carnamagus, even that dire and soul-blasting formula to which Quartil Utas, demon of ultimate corruption, would respond from the outer void. Too well Sebastian divined the origin of the grey dust, the reason of those mysterious crumblings. Again he felt the impulse of flight, but his body was a dry, dead incubus that refused to obey his volition. Anyway, he reflected, it was too late now, for the signs of doom had gathered about him and upon him. Yet surely there had never been in his heart the least longing for death and destruction. He had wished only to pursue his delvings into the blacker mysteries that environ the mortal estate, and he had always been cautious, had never cared to meddle with magic circles and evocations of perilous presences. He had known that there were spirits of evil, spirits of wrath, perdition, annihilation, but never of his own will should he have summoned any of them from their night-bound abysms. His lethargy and weakness seemed to increase. It was as if whole lustrums, whole decades of senescence had fallen upon him in the drawing of a breath. The thread of his thoughts was broken at intervals, and he recovered it with difficulty. His memories, even his fears, seemed to totter on the edge of some final forgetfulness. With dulled ears he heard a sound, as of timbers breaking and falling somewhere in the house. With dimmed eyes like those of an ancient, he saw the lights waver and go out beneath the swooping of a bat-black darkness. It was as if the night of some crumbling catacomb had closed upon him. He felt at whiles the chill, faint breathing of the draught that had troubled him before with its mystery, and again the dust rose up in his nostrils. Then he realized that the room was not wholly dark, for he could discern the dim outlines of the lectern before him. Surely no ray was admitted by the drawn window blinds, yet somehow there was light. His eyes, lifting with enormous effort, saw for the first time that a rough, irregular gap had appeared in the room's outer wall, high up in the north corner. Through it, a single star shone into the chamber, cold and remote as the eye of a demon glaring across intercosmic gulfs. Out of that star, or from the spaces beyond it, a beam of livid radiance, wan and deathly, was hurled like a spear upon Sebastian. Broad as a plank, unwavering, immovable, it seemed to transfix his very body and to form a bridge between himself and the worlds of unimagined darkness. He was as one petrified by the gaze of the Gorgon. Then, through the aperture of ruin, there came something that glided stiffly and rapidly into the room toward him, along the beam. The wall seemed to crumble. The rift widened as it entered. It was a figure no larger than a young child, but sere and shriveled as some millennial mummy. Its hairless head, its unfeatured face, borne on a neck of skeleton thinness, were lined with 1,000 reticulated wrinkles. The body was like that of some monstrous, withered abortion that had never drawn breath. The pipy arms, ending in bony claws, were outthrust as if ankylosed in the posture of an eternal, dreadful groping. The legs, with feet like those of a pygmy death, were drawn tightly together, as though confined by the swathings of the tomb, nor was there any movement of striding or pacing. Upright and rigid, The horror floated swiftly down the one deathly grey beam towards Sebastian. Now it was close upon him, its head level with his brow and its feet opposite his bosom. For a fleeting moment he knew that the horror had touched him with its outflung hands, with its starkly floating feet. It seemed to merge within him, to become one with his being. He felt that his veins were choked with dust, that his brain was crumbling cell by cell. Then he was no longer John Sebastian, but a universe of dead stars and worlds that fell eddying into darkness before the tremendous blowing of some ultrastellar wind. The thing that immemorial wizards had named Quatulu Tas was gone, and night and starlight had returned to that ruinous chamber. But nowhere was there any shadow of John Sebastian, only a low mound of dust on the floor beside the lectern, bearing a vague depression like the imprint of a small foot, or of 2 feet that were pressed closely together.
In the dead of night, when the moon is high, and the ill winds blow, and the banshees cry, and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
pay close attention to the stars and shadows. The time of great sorrow and the pain has arrived. The time to respect your elder gods is now.
Final warning. checked on the van in the back of the Walmart parking lot shortly after the second body surfaced near Turkey Creek, not too far from the first corpse, which had been discovered the previous week. Both victims were female, college students from Valpo. Dark hair, miniskirts, too much makeup, disappeared after a night of boozing. None of us believed we'd ever harbor a serial killer in little old Lublin, Indiana. That sort of thing just didn't happen around here. We got to discussing the problem at the Pub 900. Dale Kipple, who lost his legs in Desert Storm, fixed foreign cars at a shop in Maryville, and once ran for mayor as a libertarian, said, "I know everyone on 5th Street. Not a soul there capable of taking another human life." His hunting buddy, Jack Houck, a professed vegetarian who owned and ran the deli on Temple Avenue, echoed his friend's sentiment. "I've lived in Lublin my entire life. Ain't ever met anyone so freaky they'd commit murder." Most of us agreed the university in Valpo had attracted undesirable characters over the years. Their shenanigans usually involved drinking too much and the occasional rape of a student or professor who'd passed out in the street. Several nights of debate led to the obvious conclusion that the Turkey Creek Killer, as the Free Press had taken to calling him, her or it, could not be someone local. We were church-going folk. Most of us were Lutheran. A few were Catholics, but we forgave them. Politically, we leaned toward the right, though there were a good number of liberals amongst us who, as predicted, suggested we not rush to judgment. Dennis Cromwell fell on that side of the fence. He taught something called gender studies at Valpo, and rumor had it he apologized to his students at the beginning of every semester for having been born with testicles instead of ovaries. We didn't much prefer the kind of talk folks like Dennis produced, but he'd lived here several decades with his chunky wife Ellen, and we'd gotten used to hearing him tell us all manner of ways up was down and day was night and so on. You've watched television recently, been to the movies, listened to the monotonous bile passing for pop music. You know what we're getting at. Dennis said, obviously, a very disturbed misogynist has found his way to Lublin. Before we condemn him, let's find out what his father did to him when he was a child. We suggested Dennis head on to the dollar store on Madison Avenue and buy an ounce of common sense. Then a third body snagged Jeff Coe's fishing line. He'd cast under the bridge near the old train station by the creek, sat in the autumn sun drinking beer and complaining to his buddy Zach Park about Somalis who'd moved into the house next to his. Said it was only a matter of time before ISIS convinced his new neighbors to go on some sort of holy rampage. Jeff might have been a little bonkers from his days as a foreman at Werner's dairy farm, but he sure looked humble when he described pulling in the bloated corpse of a Valpo girl named Melissa Larson. Dark hair, brown eyes, known at the Pub 900 for playing poker and getting soused every Wednesday night. That woman was naked as the day God sent her from her mama's womb, he told us. Thought for sure I'd caught a 50-pounder, something I might be able to sell at the farmer's market on Sunday. He said he struggled, tugging on the line, until he swallowed his pride and asked his buddy Zach to help him. They dragged the girl's tattered body onto the rocks. Zach called Lublin PD. They finished their beer waiting for them to show. "Gonna be a long time," said Jeff. before I get to sleep without seeing that girl's wide eyes staring at me like I was the one who snuffed her. We asked about the wound in her throat. "Oh, it was cut all right," he said, "ripped open like a bag of cereal." Once the local police were convinced the 3 murders were the work of the same deranged individual, they contacted the FBI. Enough of us loitered in and around the station to learn bits and pieces. The young women had been violated before and after their throats had been slit. Coroner they brought in from D.C. said the wounds were so jagged and rough, the killer must have used a rusted blade. Black SUVs with D.C. plates roamed Lublin for 3 days like predators. The women called them creepy. Said maybe we'd let Big Brother a little too close. Said we should be able to weed out the killer ourselves. "Take away the students who rent rooms during the school year," said Mrs. Lacey, who ran a group home near the bus depot on Temple Avenue. "And what kind of population we got here?" She pushed up the sleeves on her thick wool sweater and answered before anyone else could. "Not much, I tell you. That's what we got here. Not much. What's it gonna take to figure out who doesn't belong?" She paused, as though we could read her mind. "Not much," she said. "It's not gonna take much." The women insisted we form our own teams to fan out and investigate. Good thing, too. The FBI lollygagged a couple of days and announced they were returning to D.C. to run tests and conjecture and do all manner of things unrelated to picking through strangers in Lublin to figure out who was round and who was square. Most of us found nothing out of place, nothing beyond usual. Frank Gosh and his wife Sue, however, arrived at the pub with the most astonishing news. They'd spent the day scouring the mall and the Walmart on Madison Avenue. After chatting with pretty little Katie Romero, who welcomed folks at the door of the Walmart, they learned a white van with Missouri license plates had been parking overnight in the Walmart lot for almost a month. "Oh, you better believe Katie's concerned," said Frank. "She even called the police. They interviewed the guy who sleeps in the van and told her the only thing they could do is find him for loitering." We shook our heads. Lublin cops were notorious for being next to useless when things got serious. They were never around when drunks downtown started bar fights. They always showed up afterward, when the men were finished bashing in each other's brains and had gone back to killing themselves the more civilized way, whiskey and beer. We decided to take a trip to the Walmart and have a chat with the gentleman in the van. Turned out to be a 120, no windows on the side. Every movie and TV show we'd ever seen about serial killers, vans always played a role. Ron Stork, bus driver for the Lake County School District and Lublin's dead ringer for Grizzly Adams, tapped on the side of it. "Open up," he said. We knew someone was home. Flashing blue lights inside suggested the man had a small television. He poked his head out. "Yes?" he said with an air as pompous as a savior. "Well, we'd like to talk with you," said Dale Kipple. The stranger stepped from the van. Couldn't have been more than 5'2", balding, wore spectacles. His collared t-shirt and blue jeans looked like they hadn't seen a laundry machine in ages. And he smelled. He smelled bad, like he'd made a career of soiling his drawers and refused to wash them. We didn't need too much more. This was our guy. But Sue Gosh, at the prompt of Dennis Cromwell, proceeded to interrogate him anyway. "We'd like to know who you are and what your business is in Lublin." She folded her arms across her well-endowed chest. He drew his face back as though he'd gotten a whiff of himself for the first time. Beg pardon? You'd have thought he was the Pope and answered to no one other than God. Katie Romero says you've been parking here a month, said Sue. You planning on living here forever? Or you gonna move on sometime? The stranger said, Manager of the Walmart told me I could crash here, provided I don't bother nobody. We were stunned. Lou Papolini ran the Walmart. He hadn't lived in Lublin for too long. He had a black, curly head of hair that always made us a little nervous. Surely he must have had better sense than to let a drifter take residence in his lot. Sue motioned for us to keep quiet. She taught kindergarten at Haggard Elementary, knew how to control a rowdy situation. Mister, she said, I think we'd feel a lot better if you'd mosey on to another town. You'd have thought the stranger was Jesus, the way he took offense to her suggestion. I beg your pardon, he said again. Last time I checked, this was a free country. Oh boy. We looked at each other. We shook our heads, sighed, made clicking sounds with our tongues. Wasn't this the go-to excuse for strangers and weirdos everywhere? People who didn't fit in always tried that bit, never understanding freedom only belonged to normal folks, like us. Frank Gosh said, Look, buddy, we don't want to cast nasty aspersions, but we've had some trouble and we'd like to 86 any possible culprits. He nodded his square jaw like one of those tough guy lawyers we always saw on television. The stranger smirked and got back into his van. Before he slammed the side doors, he said, Bug me again, I'll sick the cops on you. That gave us a hearty har-har. We couldn't get the police to toss him out of town, and he thought they'd actually give a damn about his rights? One thing was clear. The man was creepy. The women used that word over and over to describe him. Did you see the clothes he was wearing? Creepy. He looked just like that serial killer from Chicago. You remember the clown in the ice cream truck? Creepy. My God, he reminded me of a short, fat, balding Ed Gein. Creepy. We invited Sergeant Alphonse Booker to the pub the following night. He was a local boy, played football for Gary South the year they came within 3 games of state. We thought we could trust him. We said, Sergeant, you gotta escort that stranger right out of town. Unless Lou Papolini tells me otherwise, he said, the man is welcome to park his van and sleep there. The women chimed in, said he looked creepy, and they just knew he was the Turkey Creek Killer. You see anything in his van to make you think so? We hadn't done a spectacular job of investigating. Most of us felt no need. The stranger was clearly a weirdo. Only weirdos committed murder. Hell, any television show about criminals would confirm that. The sergeant told us not to get involved. You let the authorities take care of this from here on. We asked just what they were doing to fix the problem. He said, we're waiting on Uncle Sam to get back with the lab results. We rolled our eyes at that one. Surely the sergeant knew better than to trust the government. He said nabbing serial killers fell under federal jurisdiction. Then he said, y'all don't pay me enough to mount a serious investigation anyway. He was shown the door at that point. We decided to head on back over to Madison Avenue and give the stranger in the van another look. We needed to find some good evidence. When we got to his spot near the rear of the Walmart parking lot, his windshield flashed blue and white again. We banged on the side doors until he showed his arrogant face. Dan Gruber, football coach at Haggard High, 350 pounds, hands the size of baseball mitts, dragged him out and held him against the van by his throat. The rest of us jumped inside and went through the garbage he'd collected. There were no benches, just blankets and trash bags. His tiny television, a black and white number from the last century, sat on the hump between the front seats. He had no antenna. He was watching static. Creepy. We found a paper sack from a grocery store we'd never heard of, filled with plastic knives, forks, and spoons. Inside half a pack of styrofoam plates, we wedged a steak knife. A real steak knife. Some of us argued. Remember, the coroner said it was rusty. The rest of us got them to go along. It's a knife, ain't it? We pointed out tiny red stains on the jagged teeth of the blade. Could be ketchup, said one wise guy. We glared at him until he caved. We shoved the knife in the stranger's face. Yeah? He spoke in snotty tones we'd have expected from a teenager. Looks like a murder weapon to me, said Carl Gooseberg, the nearsighted owner of the shooting range in Hammond. The stranger chuckled. Only a creepy, weirdo psychopath would laugh when confronted with that kind of evidence. We're taking you downtown, said Dan. Cops won't come and get you. We'll bring you to them. He bunched the stranger's dirty t-shirt around his fist. The stranger dropped to the ground, refused to go. Gonna need some help, said Dan. So we grabbed the stranger wherever we could and dragged him across the concrete. He screamed for his life, claimed he was being abducted. Funny how you let relativism fester long enough, evil will call itself a victim. He made himself heavy as a sack of wet concrete. We lost our grips and had to pull him with more force, smacking his head against the pavement over and over until we noticed he'd stopped making noise, stopped moving, stopped resisting. Hey, Dan said to him. We dropped him, offered him the chance to escape, to prove to us he was still alive. His creepy brown eyes stared at us in the cold blue moonlight. His mouth had twisted and wouldn't untwist. Dale Kipple leaned in close, put his ear near his chest. Friends, he said, he found the best way to escape justice. We agreed to leave him there, let the lazy police see if they could figure out what had happened to him. We told the women we'd spotted the murder weapon, and that's all they needed to know. Hell, they'd assumed the man guilty long before we did. Loveland's Finest wrote off the stranger's death as a heart attack. Who knew? Who cared? Just days after he died, we met a girl from Valpo at Pub 900 on college night. Her name was Sadie. She had long, gorgeous black hair, wore glitter on her face like a pop star. We watched her drink 6 mugs of beer. We liked her. We really, really liked her. We waited for her in the alley behind the bar. She stepped outside around 1 in the morning to toss her cookies near a green dumpster. She was alone. We loved that. We put our hands around her mouth and carried her into the darkness.
You are listening to truly independent radio, KBGA Missoula, 89.9 on your FM dial and on the World Wide Web.
I've been are still among the living. But I who write shall have long since gone my way into the region of shadows. For indeed strange things shall happen, and secret things be known, and many centuries shall pass away ere these memorials be seen of men. And, when seen, there will be some to disbelieve and some to doubt, and yet a few who will find much to ponder upon in the characters here graven with a stylus of iron. The year had been a year of terror, and of feelings more intense than terror, for which there is no name upon the earth. For many prodigies and signs had taken place, and far and wide over sea and land the black wings of the pestilence were spread abroad. To those nevertheless cunning in the stars, it was not unknown that the heavens wore an aspect of ill, and to me, the Greek oinos, among others, it was evident that now had arrived the alternation of that 794th year, when at the entrance of Aries the planet Jupiter is conjoined with the red ring of the terrible Saturnus. The peculiar spirit of the skies, if I mistake not greatly, made itself manifest, not only in the physical orb of the earth, but in the souls, imaginations, and meditations of mankind. Over some flasks of the red Chian wine, within the walls of a noble hall, in a dim city called Ptolemais, we sat at night a company of 7. And to our chamber there was no entrance save by a lofty door of brass, and the door was fashioned by the artisan Corinnos, and being of rare workmanship was fastened from within. Black draperies likewise in the gloomy room shut out from our view the moon, the lurid stars, and the peopleless streets. But the boding and the memory of evil, they would not be so excluded. There were things around us and about of which I can render no distinct account. Things material and spiritual, heaviness in the atmosphere, a sense of suffocation, anxiety, and above all, that terrible state of existence which the nervous experience when the senses are keenly living and awake, and meanwhile the powers of thought lie dormant. A dead weight hung upon us. It hung upon our limbs, upon the household furniture, upon the goblets from which we drank, and all things were depressed and borne down thereby. All things save only the flames of the 7 iron lamps which illumined our revel, uprearing themselves in tall, slender lines of light. They thus remained burning, all pallid and motionless. And in the mirror which their lustre formed upon the round table of ebony at which we sat, each of us there assembled behind the pallor of his own countenance, and the unquiet glare in the downcast eyes of his companions, yet we laughed, and were merry in our proper way, which was hysterical, and sang the songs of Anacreon, which are madness, and drank deeply, although the purple wine reminded us of blood. For there was yet another tenant of our chamber, in the person of young Zoilus. Dead, and at full length he lay, enshrouded, the genius and the demon of the scene. Alas, he bore no portion in our mirth, save that his countenance, distorted with the plague, and his eyes, in which death had but half extinguished the fire of the pestilence, seemed to take such interest in our merriment as the dead may haply take in the merriment of those who are to die. But although I, Oinos, felt that the eyes of the departed were upon me, still I forced myself not to perceive the bitterness of their expression, and gazing down steadily into the depths of the ebony mirror, sang with a loud and sonorous voice the songs of the son of Taios. But gradually my songs they ceased, and their echoes, rolling afar off among the sable draperies of the chamber, became weak and undistinguishable, and so faded away. And lo, from among those sable draperies, where the sounds of the song departed, there came forth a dark and undefined shadow, a shadow such as the moon, when low in heaven, might fashion from the figure of a man. But it was the shadow neither of man, nor of God, nor of any familiar thing. and, quivering a while among the draperies of the room, it at length rested in full view upon the surface of the door of brass. But the shadow was vague and formless and indefinite, and was the shadow neither of man nor of God, neither God of Greece, nor God of Chaldea, nor any Egyptian god. And the shadow rested upon the brazen doorway, and under the arch of the entablature of the door, and moved not, nor spoke any word, but there became stationary, and remained. And the door whereupon the shadow rested was, if I remember aright, over against the feet of the young Zoilus enshrouded. But we, the seven there assembled, having seen the shadow as it came out from among the draperies, dared not steadily behold it, but cast down our eyes, and gazed continually into the depths of the mirror of ebony. And at length I, Oinos, speaking some low words, demanded of the shadow its dwelling and its appellation. And the shadow answered, I am Shadow, and my dwelling is near to the catacombs of Ptolemais, and hard by those dim plains of Helusion, which border upon the foul Charonian Canal. And then did we, the seven, start from our seats in horror, and stand trembling and shuddering and aghast. For the tones in the voice of the shadow were not the tones of any one being, but of a multitude of beings, and varying in their cadences from syllable to syllable, fell duskily upon our ears in the well-remembered and familiar accents of many 1,000 departed friends.
You have been listening to Respect Your Elder Gods on KBGA Missoula with your host, Mr. C. I hope you can join us again next week at this same time for more doom and gloom and sludge and blood and guts and all the other gory details that make life worth dying for. Until then, do remember to watch the skies and study the shadows and always respect your elder gods.
My girl, don't lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? Come on, tell me, baby. In the pond, where the sun don't ever shine. I was shivering all night through. My girl, where will you go? I'm going where the cold wind blows. Where's that, baby? In the pond, where the sun don't ever shine. I was shivering all night through. My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? Come on and tell me something about it. In the pond, where the sun don't ever shine. I bet you all night through. Shiver for me now. What happened down there? My husband was a hard working man, killed a mile and a half from here. What happened to him? His head was found in a driver wheel, and his body haven't never been found. My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? Come on and tell me something about it. In the pond, where the sun don't ever shine. I bet you all night through.